Hey everyone, this is John from Tulip, and in this video, I'm going to show you how to build an instant messenger application in Tulip. So what this application is going to allow you to do is actually send direct messages back and forth to different individuals at different stations of your operation. So before we get started, I want to do two things. First, I just want to say if you're new to Tulip and you haven't built an application before, you don't understand how the platform works, I've put some links to some different educational content you can use. It'll introduce you to the platform, get you up and running. If not, you can learn a lot just from watching this video, so I encourage you to try to follow along and just learn the platform by building with me. The second thing I want to do is actually just show you what this application looks like in practice, so you know what we're going to be building. Okay, so the way I've designed it is that you have your sort of inbox screen. What this is an interactive table that shows all of the messages that you have that are unread. So you can filter through these, just say, see who they're from, or who it's to, who it's from, when it was sent. And every time you click on this interactive table, that record is going to load in this little sort of a reader over here. Let's say you've already read all of these messages, you want them to disappear. You just click mark as read, and that will allow you to get rid of all of these different messages. So great, that's it. That's your inbox function. Now about sending messages. So if you click on send a message, it'll take you to the screen over here, give you the opportunity to send a message. So you just type it in right here. So this is what I want to say with typos. We will select our recipient as me, just so it populates in my instance. Click send. So cleared all of this stuff out of here. So if we wanted to send another one, we're ready to go. We'll click back, and that message is right here, typo and everything. So last little feature I want to show you before we jump in and start building together is the archive. So let's say I click over here. We're going to get the same format screen as we did on the last one, but instead of showing us all of our unread messages, it's going to give us an ordered list of all of the messages we've sent, or all of the messages we've been sent. So let's say we needed to find that message someone else sent us. We could just go over here, click on the message, and filter through it that way. Great. So that's what we're building. Let's get started. All right, so I'm here in the application editor, and before we get started, let me just show you a little bit about how this application is put together. Okay, so this application is comprised of three different screens, and the way we're actually sending and storing the messages is by using a Tulip table. So more on that later. I'll show you exactly how to put this together and how do you construct the table and connect to it. You can see this over here, but really the way this is working is our inbox right here is an interactive table where every single message that we have winds up being a row in this table right here. And when we click on every single row, we're using an embedded table to display the particular field from that table record we're interested in. The send a message screen works basically on that same table structure. So when we're typing their message in here, what it's ultimately doing is uploading whatever text is in that box right here into the message field in the table, and same goes for the recipient. When we select a recipient, it's getting loaded into the recipient field in this table. That allows us to, in this interactive table, to filter out and to make sure we're just sending messages from and to particular people. And it allows us to keep that historical record of our conversations. The archive screen, I don't want to spend a huge amount of time on right here, just because the archive is sort of the inverse of the your messages. What I'm really doing right here is just filtering out these messages using a field in this table that is red. So as soon as there's anything in that field, it'll be marked as red, and we'll be able to see it over in the archive as opposed to the your messages. Okay, so all right, enough about what this application is and how it's working. Let's actually get in and start building it. And what we're going to do first is we're just going to create a new application. So I'm in this folder called Build It Together that I'm going to fill with videos of this type. And I'll just click on Create an App or App Group, drop that down, create an app. Let's title it Instant Messenger Together. Great. So now I'll click OK. All right, so the first thing we're going to want to do is just add our steps to this and create our master layout. So we can click in here, the untitled step. We know that this is a 3-step application, so we'll just add 3 steps real quick. Just add some titles right here to make sure we're keeping everything labeled as we go. So we'll call the first one inbox, the second one send a message, and the third one we'll call archive. And from here, we will go and I will edit our master layout. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to click on this master layout down here. This isn't the most exciting thing you're going to see in this video. This is actually probably boring. And if you know any Tulip, you probably don't need to watch me do this. So I recommend skipping ahead or watching it on 2x speed just to get the sense of how this works. And just one pro tip, for this master layout, the one that I've used in this application, it's a pretty standard master layout. So if you've used the Tulip library before or you have any applications from the library, just go into there and copy and paste one of those master layouts. It's pretty standard. So the first thing I'll do to create this master layout is I'll just create our borders up here, because that's really what it's doing, is it's framing the content we're going to put in here. So I'll make this one slightly small because this is just where we're going to put some variables to read out information about who is logged in and the time, the step name. Put that up here. We'll change the color really quickly. So just make that dark, and we'll make this, I'll move myself over here again, slightly less dark. That looks like a fine contrast to me. It doesn't look like we have a huge amount of overlap. We'll just copy and paste this down, drag it to the bottom, maybe just add a little bit more buffer right there. And then the next thing we need to do is just add our labels and variables to this. So the first thing is just we'll click on buttons, select a menu. Just best practice is you want to have a menu. A lot of your steps, it can lead to a lot of navigational difficulties if you don't have a menu. So it's just good to get this in your master layout to make sure it's there. All right, so the next thing we want to do is make sure we have the step name read out right here. So we have a little title cue on every single step. So we'll go into text. We'll put step name right here. It already exists right there. Let's make the text slightly off-white. Bring it up here, and we'll just make it a little bit larger. Let's say 60. No, 1,000. That was not what I meant to type in. So click 60. Make that a little larger. All right. We like to throw our logo up in the top left corner of things. It's nice, just a little bit of things up there. A lot of our customers do it as well. So we'll just drop that up there. And then the final things we're going to want to do are add a little cue that allows us to show who the user is. So just type in user here, make this small, that size 20, change the color to white or off-white, pull this up here. I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time making this look super pretty. I'm way more interested in showing you the functionality of this. So I hope you'll forgive some of these small cosmetic issues right here. Just copy and paste that over. So now we'll create let's just call this date and time right here. Date that in. All right, so the next thing we'll do is we'll just add variables that'll allow us to read in who the user is and the date and time based on inputs. So the thing I did right here, okay, so just really quick in case you never seen this happen in Tulip before. So what I've done is I've come over here to Tulip, I've selected a variable. This is going to allow me to populate this text with whatever value is currently stored in that variable. I've chosen a variable that comes standard with Tulip that works on app metadata. So when you're logged into an application, your particular user or user identity, the application is going to read that, and we can access that information through the logged in user information over here. So we'll just follow our styling from the other one. So we'll make that white instead of purple, drop that up here, and the next thing we'll do is just make this a little smaller, copy this variable over, and switch it over to, click on here, click this over to current date and time. You can find that at the bottom. Let's just do current date because that's really what we care about. That will read out. Okay, so it's a little sketchy. It's not as pretty as what I showed you up front, but this is what we're working with. This is our master layout for this application, for this inbox sheet right here. Okay, so this is going to comprise of a couple features. Remember, we have our interactive table that's going to occupy the top left part of the screen. We'll have our button that allows us to navigate to the send a message step, and we'll have a pane over here that's going to allow us to read a message. It's basically just going to frame our message. So let's take each of these steps one by one. So the first thing we're going to do is embed an interactive table. So in order to do that, we'll come over here to the embed toolbar up top, drop that down, and select the interactive table option. We're gonna have to do a little bit more to make this work, but for right now, let's just get this in here as part of our layout. Great. So the next thing we'll do is add that button. So we'll just select a button, get this over resized a little bit, line it up, add some text to send a message. Cool. Again, I'm not going to be super precise on alignment. I'm much more interested in you learning the basics of this than I am in producing the prettiest application. Okay, so the sort of tact I've taken over here is to frame the message, to create a box that we can put it in. So to do that, I've just took a rectangle, made it roughly the size of half the screen, filled it with a slightly off-white color just to give it a little bit of differentiation from the background. You can say this one's the best, and then added a light border to it. So we'll take basically black, make it pretty thin. Let's just jump that up to 4, and we have our box right here. Okay, so the next thing that I want to do is just then put in the embedded table record that's going to allow us to see the message that we've selected in our inbox. So come over here to text, we'll select table record. So this is going to allow us to choose from any field in a table record. We will make this the size of our little frame over here in case the message is large. It's going to overspill. And that's really what we need to do for this screen right now. The next stuff we're going to have to do is really just building the table. I want to do one more and just put this send a message screen together first. But for this screen right now, this is the layout we're going to work with. So let's go over to send a message really quickly. And we will do text. Same here, we'll come up, text is in the inputs toolbar, drop it down, find it right there. Let's make this large because we want there to be plenty of space for someone to input their message. We don't want it to be like one of those little teeny tiny boxes where you're end up writing a single word scroll for a mile. All right, so what we're gonna do is we'll make the border a little heavier on this 4, and we'll come down here. We'll go to this little toggle over here to multiple lines and put that on. And this will allow our input to be basically the size of the box we've dragged down. And then from here, we just need to add a couple little extra details. Okay, so we will add some text that says recipient. Let's put a colon in there so it looks nice. Then we'll add a drop-down menu. So the input is going to be a single select. We'll populate this later. I'll show you how to do that. And then our button. Great, let's just resize that really quick. Click. Send. Great. This is the layout of your application. I'm not going to mess with archive right now, and I'll show you why in a little bit. But we're ready to start adding logic to the application. We're ready to start building the table. Now we're into the meat and potatoes. Okay, so from here we really need to start building this table that's going to serve as the data backbone of our application. Okay, so our inbox is going to rely on this table. Our embedded message over here is going to rely on that table. Everything essentially is going to read back to this table. All right, so I'm using this table that I've created right now called Messenger right now. If you're using the library right now and you want to continue to just stick with the library data model, I would recommend that you use the notes table and just add fields onto this notes table. That's going to allow you to just preserve any integrity between applications that are already reliant on this table. But for the purposes of this exercise, I'm going to build the table from scratch. So let me just navigate back to this messenger really quickly and show you how I'm thinking about this. Okay, so when you think like really break an instant messenger down, there are a few key pieces of information that you need attached to every single message. So you need a recipient, like when someone is writing a message, it needs to go to someone. So we need a field that accounts for a recipient. We need a sender because any recipient wants to know where the message is coming from. It's a critical piece of information. So we need a field for the message right here, something that actually stores the text that we're communicating. And then some useful ones to have are time sent, you get a timestamp on that, time read, in case you want to measure the distance between the two, or as you'll see, this is going to allow us to use that mark as read button later on. And then I have this field over here, this mark as read, that's for the purposes of this application is going to allow us to filter things out. Okay, so that's the gist of this table right here. And then if you've never seen a Tulip table before, this is just essentially a database. It's a table like you would have in SQL or any other sort of database you're familiar with. And each of these little icons next to the field name right here is a data type. So this recipient field right here is a user data type. So that's going to be populated only by different users in Tulip. Message is text. Time sent and time read are both datetime variables, and then read is text. Okay, so showed you this one. Let's build it together. All right, so I'll come back to tables right here. If you're looking for just how to find tables from the dashboard or from the app developer, go to apps, scroll down to tables, click, you'll end up in a screen like this. So what I'll do is I'll come over here, I'll click on tables, I'll name it. So test messenger table. We don't really need a description right here, so we'll create it. All right, so when we create a table, what we're going to see is this screen. I got to navigate into there really quickly if I can find the T's. There we go, test messenger table. So we'll be blank right here. So when you're building a Tulip table, you're starting from scratch. Another reason to use those library tables, they're going to come pre-populated with fields, but for this exercise, let's start building from scratch. All right, so let's work with our fields. If we want to create a new column, all we need to do is click this plus sign. It's going to allow us to select our data type and select our label. So the first thing we'll do is select user as our data type, type in sender right here. Now we have a field that we can populate with sender information. So we can do the same for recipient right here. Scroll down, select user as our data type, and then we'll put in recipient. And then let's just keep going on down the line. So we had we can keep it as text. This is our message. Just like a best practice with these fields, as long as you can tell what you're naming it, it's generally a good idea, but you should be as evocative as possible. You want to be clear on what your fields are doing. All right, time sent. Let's say time read, time opened. Let's say, oops, cancel it. So using the second datetime one, time opened. And then we'll go to the next one, which is finally a final text one, read. And we're going to use the application itself to actually populate all of this stuff. We don't need to do anything here. If we wanted to add a record here just to get started, we could click on the add record up at the top, and that would allow us to start adding rows to this table with all sorts of information that we input manually here. We're not going to do that. We are going to use our application for this. All right, so now that we've built this table, we're ready to start actually integrating it into our application. Okay. Now that we've built our tables, let's talk about the different types of references that we're making to that table on our application. So let's start with this interactive table right here. All right, so this needs to reference that table. In order to actually populate with different rows and different messages, we need some way of connecting it back to that original Tulip table we produced. Same goes with this record over here. We need some way of referencing our source material. So the way you do that in Tulip is over here under this tab called Records, next to Step. And we're going to use a concept called a record placeholder. So just really quickly, record placeholders are a stand-in. We're not communicating directly to the table. The application is pointing to the placeholder, and then the placeholder is pointing to different records in the table. It's a lot easier than it sounds in practice. So the first thing I'll do is I'll just create that little reference point right here. I'll click on Records, add a record placeholder, and this is going to allow me to select which table I want to reference in the first place. So I'll come down and I'll select our test messenger table, and we will call this just messages. We'll add our record placeholder. Great. And so now this is like the single item we're going to point to when we want to add values into tables dynamically in our application. All right, so let's start doing that then. So let's point this data source to that table. So we'll click on the data source, make sure it's selected, come over to the widget tab on the right, and we'll work with this data source dropdown. This is going to give us options to use going to be the variable we can point to or a Tulip table. We're using our test messengers table, so we'll collect Tulip table. Now it's going to have us point further, so we need to select which one. I'll scroll down to the test messenger, and now we need to select a placeholder. So you can have multiple record placeholders for every table that you're pointing to. Some applications will have quite a few. We're just going to select this one record placeholder for us. All right, so now this is going to allow us to go in and start aligning this interactive table with the different fields that exist in our test messenger table. Let me show you how that works. So as I'm scrolling down here within this sort of widget pane on the right, we have this little area called columns right here. So if I drop this down, you're going to have a list of different fields that exist in that table. And when we select each one of these fields, we're going to be able to see whatever data exists in that field in the record we're interested in our interactive table. So let me start with that. So I'll click Messages right here, and you'll see that now we have a column over here for messages. Click on ID. I'll click Sender, Time Sent, and let's see what other information we want. Maybe we will want the ID as well, just for the hell of it, in case you have you're storing messages that need a particular ID associated with them. We'll come back to this filter in a second, but for now, I want to do one more thing. I want to just click this select button on, and this is going to put little select buttons next to every row in our table. Okay, so I said we was going to come back to the filters. I will come back to the filter right now. So let's think about what this application is doing. We want to see only the messages that are for us, and we want to see only the messages that are unread. So let me come up here and see where we could run into problems with that. So let's say you have 5 or 6 people using this application in individual stations. Every single time they send a message, theoretically, their name should populate as the sender, and the person that's sending it to should populate into the recipient column. Well, if this table is reading out every single message that is sent by anybody, we're going to wind up with everybody else's message. We need some way of getting rid of the noise. Similarly, once we've read a message, we kind of don't want to see it anymore. Wish it was gone. So what we're going to do is come over here, we're going to add a filter, and for now we're just going to add one filter. We're just going to filter out to make sure that the messages that we're receiving are the messages that were intended for us. So I'll come over here, I'll click on filter, make sure all of these conditions are true. The first thing I'll do is drop this down. It's going to give us a list of the fields in that table, and I will click recipient. The recipient will give us more information. We can fill that in. Come over here to variable, and because we know that logged in user is a variable in Tulip, select logged in user and save it right here. All right, so from here, now we need to align this embedded table with our table record. We do that in very much the same way. So this is going to give us a drop-down that will allow us to point to every single record placeholder that exists in this application at this moment. For right now, we only have our test messenger table and we only have one record placeholder. So we're going to go to the record placeholder for messages, roll this down to message, and this is going to show you in that record placeholder messages, it's going to display message. All right, so I think that's what we need to do for right now. That is how we configure these tables and attach them to the record placeholder. So from here, let's talk about sending a message and then adding some extra filters and a mark as read button into here. Let's put together the step that allows us to send a message. All right, so let's think about what the step actually has to do. So we have a text input right here, somewhere that allows a user to input text. We have a field that allows us to input a recipient. What we ultimately need to do is take whatever data and whatever text or user is stored in these two fields and get it into that table, because ultimately we're going to need to access that information from that table in our inbox screen. So luckily Tulip makes that super easy to do. And so each of these inputs right here, this drop-down menu right here and this text input right here, we can both turn into variables. So what I'll actually do is I will store the content we're interested in a variable, and then we're going to reference and push whatever value is in that variable into our tables upon sending. So I'm going to go through that whole process with you right here. It's pretty simple ultimately, as long as you understand that we're using variables to get data from one place into another place. All right, so I'll click on this text input right here, come over to the widget pane on the right, and I will select a variable. So we haven't made any variables yet, and what this is going to allow us to do is to create a variable. So it says pick or create a variable. I'm just going to create one right now. I'll call it create a message. As far as like variable titles are concerned, just make sure you know what they do. They can get out of hand really quickly. So titles are good. So our value type right here, default is text. We want the default value to be blank. So now we automatically have a create a value, create a message variable. Um, that's that. That's what we need to do there. So now we'll come down here to recipient, and we're going to do the same thing. Because it's an input, we're going to need some place to store that. We're storing it in a variable. So we'll create a new variable. We'll call it recipient. We'll create it. The user or the data type we're going to need here is user. So we'll scroll down and select person. We'll create recipient. All right, so this is a cool thing that Tulip does. So normally you might need to go back to your user table over in your settings over here, and then push all of those onto an array, and then use that as an array variable to access the different items in a dropdown. Right here, this has done it for us. Because the data type is user right here, we have the option of all user. So if we test this out really quickly in dev mode, when you push test over here, if you've never seen this, it'll take you into sort of a walled off version of this application where you can play around without actually jeopardizing any production data. It'll just allow you to simulate exactly what's going on with the application. And I can only talk for so long while this is loading, so hopefully this comes through soon. I don't even think we have enough connective tissue to make this work right now. Yeah, we do, because dev mode is great, and I can just navigate directly to send a message in here. But as you'll see, it's going to give me all of the users who are associated with this account. So much ado about nothing and an introduction to dev mode there. All right, so now that we have these variables, we need to get all of this information into our table. And we're going to do that by adding trigger logic to the send button. So when we click the send button, what's going to happen is everything that we've stored in these variables is going to wind up in that table. All right, so let me show you how to do that. We'll come over here to the right to the widget, click on the send button. We'll click the plus sign, and this is going to bring us into the trigger editor in Tulip. If you've never seen this, a quick rundown for this is we're basically putting conditional logic into this button without writing any code. So you're going to see that when, so we have some sort of inciting action. We have if, so any conditions that we might want to check for when that button is pressed, and then the output actions right there. So when something happens, if X and Y are true, then do Z. So what we're going to need to do right here is just make sure that our variables aren't empty, because we don't want to send a message that has no text. We don't want to send a message that has no recipient. So we'll add a condition that says if variable. So we have a lot of options right here. I don't really have time to go through all of these, but if you have a Tulip instance, play around. you've never seen this before and want more information, there's plenty to learn about in Tulip University. So we'll say variable if create a message is not blank. Let's add a second condition, which is if variable recipient is not blank. So that's just basically going to say, as long as these are filled, let's go on and do the next thing. So here's where we actually get into the real meat of this step. So the first thing we're going to want to do is have this create a new row in our table. So, right, we're creating a message, and the unit of the message ultimately corresponds to a row in this table. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to use the app editor to create a record. So go into table records. So our verb here is going to come second, right? So most of these inciting actions, or most of these output actions, begin with verbs. So we have play sound, log out current user, go to step, manipulate data. Table records right here, the verb is going to come second. So we'll have table records, create a record by ID. There are all sorts of ways you can do this. One way I like to do this is by using the expression editor to either add a random string of numbers and figure, or just a random string together, or we can use data from our application to populate this in a way that might be more meaningful to you later on. So we'll do an expression right here. So if we wanted to do random, we could just go down here, do random string. This is going to output a random string. But for us, let's just say we want to do, when you use the @ sign, it allows you to pull up different pieces of app information. So we'll do @app info, logged in user. We'll separate it by a dash at the, let's say, at app info station. So we want to know who from where. And then we'll just say at what time. So at app info.station name, do the same thing, add a little plus sign, get a dash in there, and then add at app info current date and time. So this gives us 3 pieces of information. It's really just a way of making this as detailed as possible. Whatever works for you works. So we come down here, whenever you use the expression editor, it's important to make sure that you're saving your expressions. So click save right here, and then we just need to tell the application, or we need to include in this trigger logic where this is going. All right, so this is how we create a new record. So we go to table records, create record, some kind of name, and then say which table it's going into. All right, so from here, we're going to do some stuff that's all going to look a little bit of the same, but ultimately, we are just going to populate this table. So let me show you how to add values into the table as we do it. Okay, so we're going to drop this down, and we're going to use this data manipulation option over and over. So click on data manipulation, and we're going to do store because we want to put values into that table. So what we can say is we'll take variable, create a message. So what this is saying is we're going to store whatever value is currently in create a message into table record messages, and then we'll pick that field. So message. Great. So that's simple. Then that's the basic outline of trigger logic in Tulip. At least when you're storing information into variables or tables, you first tell it what to do. We're storing, telling it what you're storing, in this case, a variable, and then where you're storing it into a table record with messages. So let me just add a new action. Let's go on the line and make sure that this table is filled out. So we'll do data manipulation, store recipient into table record messages under recipient. So those fields line up. Let's do the date time now, like the time sent. So we'll do store the app information. So this should be app info, current date and time into table record. Ooh, why can't I reference the time sent field in that table? Oh, sorry. No hiccup right there. Sometimes you just spend a long time talking into a computer and you start reading things wrong. So the table record, the messages table, will do time sent. And if we look back at our table, we can see if there are any other fields that need to be sent at this point, and the only one is we need to populate that sender field. Um, so I will click add a new action right here, and we will do data manipulation, store data oops, app info, logged in user to, should be, if I already put something in sender, it's because logged in user into table record. I'm doing it again. So you just talk for too long and then you stop seeing what's in front of you. Into messages, sender. Great. So this is the outline. And as we can see, this should allow us to push all the data we need for this message to be intelligible into this table right now. So it's going to create a new ID. It's going to put the sender into sender, the recipient into recipient, the message from that variable into message, and the time sent from the application variable. This time opened and read are really important for our mark as read button. I'll talk about those in the next section of this video. But for now, that is how you put together this trigger logic. I can just scroll through this one more time for you to get a sense, because we're really just creating the record is the important part. The conditions are important, making sure that the variables aren't blank. And then from there, it's just stringing together all of the data manipulation stories that you need to complete the table. All right, so from here, let's talk about finishing this application with some filters and with a little extra logic on the other steps. All right, so moment of truth right here. Let's see if this message application actually sends messages to the table as we need it to. All right, so I'm in dev mode right now, and this is going to allow us to actually check the functionality uh, we've built into this application so far without actually pushing real records into this table. All right, so let's just type in something simple. Did it work? Oh, and just as a quick aside, you probably noticed that I put a back button in here, that the layout isn't exactly the same as it was the last time we were on this step. I often do that, forget to put a back button in. It's easy to do, so I did it. But more importantly, let's check if this works. I'll put a recipient in right here. I'm just keeping the session contained to myself, so I'll click send. So one thing I did notice, we're going to want to clear these variables when we click send so that we can just put a new message in without hard resetting it. We can add that logic in a second, but let's go back and see. All right, so from the message we've sent, we have created a table record, and that table record is here as a message in our inbox and is read out right there in our messages on the right. Just to see a little bit what's happening under the hood. In dev mode, this is pretty cool. I'll move myself over here. You can see that our variables are read out right here, and the value that's currently in the variable create a message is did it work. The recipient is John Clace. That's the case because we haven't cleared those out. And if we click on record placeholders, we can see that we've created that record right here that we're referencing right here. So that's pretty cool. It's working. So let's move on and start adding the finishing touches on this application. All right, so really quick, let's go back into the send a message screen and just add something to clear these variables really quickly. So I'm going to click on the send button again. And so I named this variable message to table. Don't be like me. Or this variable. I named this trigger message to tables. Don't be like me. Make sure you name your triggers. I'm going to name this one clear variables right here. So the first thing we'll do is just check if these are not blank. Actually, I don't even think we need to check that if they're not blank. I think we just need to clear them because it's going to make us check anyway. All right, so variable if create a message is not blank, add a condition if variable create a message recipient is not blank, then we'll do a data manipulation. One of the other options we have other than increment, decrement, and store is clear. So we'll clear that variable right here, clear, create a message, action, data manipulation, clear the variable recipient right here, save it right there. We can go in here now and check to make sure that these clear upon sending. So do that again. And you can see this time all of the data in here cleared out. We should have another message with exactly the same content in it because it was already there, but this time those variables have cleared out. All right, so now we get to come into the fun bit and we get to talk about filtering out our inbox by read and not read. So really quickly, I'm going to resize this so we can add our button in. So the first thing I'll do is just I'll add some text. So this is labeled, yada, yada, yada. Adding text is the most interesting thing we could be doing right now. Your messages, that in there, and then I'll add a button that we're going to use to mark as read. All right, so make that small just to keep it like a visually appealing and easy to interact with. All right, you don't want to make it too small just so that it works. All right, change the color here, make that red, contrast so it stands out. And then we'll click mark as read. All right, so there are two things we're going to need to do to make this work. And it all comes back to our initial table structure. All right, so what we're going to want to do is every single time we're going to make it so that every single time we click on a record in our interactive table right here, it adds that information, it adds that time into this time open button. And then we're going to use that field right there to determine whether or not it's read. And if we have, then once we've determined that it's read, we can filter it out. So I'll show you how you do that right now. So let's go in here and we'll add a additional filter right here. So like right now we have recipient equals logged in user. So we can go in here, you can add a filter, and we can say read is null, right? So if, or is not null, because if there's going to be any data at all in that red column, then we want to filter it out. So if logged in user, we want to filter by logged in user. We want to filter by, no, we do want null right there. We want to filter because we only want to see null ones. If it is not null, then we don't want to see it. Man, use this for long enough and you start getting your nots and yeses backwards. All right, so nothing meets that criteria so far. So let's start adding our logic to this table and to our mark as read button. All right, so we'll click on first here. So I mean, as with everything in Tulip, you can add logic to it. So we'll click on here, and when a row is selected, we want to update time opened. So when the row is selected, we want to just say data manipulation, store app information, current date and time, to table record, messages, time opened. All right. So now we're going to reference this in our mark as read trigger. So say when button is pressed, if table record, messages, time opened is not blank, then data manipulation, store, we'll just use an expression right here. We just need something in there, not nothing, so we'll just say yes, or let's call it, we'll just say read into there. So we'll save that expression into table record, messages, read. And from here, that should allow us to filter out these different messages. So let's go in and see if this actually worked in here. All right, so we have these two right here. Clicking them, did it work? Did it work? We can mark as read. Let's see if that disappears. So it did not disappear in dev mode. Okay, so it just took a little while to update. All right, sorry for the radio silence right there, but it is in fact working. I can go back and show you what that logic looks like again in case you want to see it. It might be useful. So again, I can recap really quickly. So the first thing we did is we added an additional filter onto this application, or onto this interactive table. So we just wanted to make sure that we're filtering by the two fields in this table. So recipient, we're just making sure that the recipient is the person who's logged in, and we're making sure that this column red is not, or is null. If it's been red, it shouldn't be there. All right, and when we go into this button right here, what we've done is we've just basically asked this trigger to say, call it mark as red. All right, we've just basically said if that time opened is not blank, so if there's already something in there, we could just make sure that it is. We could put red into our red column. All right, so from here, we just have our couple finishing touches to put on this application. So more on that in a second. All right, so the last things we need to do are just like clean up a little, some little rough spots around the edges and put in our archive page. All right, so some little rough spots that I found so far. This send a message button doesn't go anywhere. So let's just add the trigger logic we need to go to the send a message page. Super easy, just when the button is clicked, we'll just call it go to message and messenger. Go to messenger, we'll add the action. So when the button is pressed, go to step, and we're gonna be able to select the stage, right? Step name right here, and it's gonna be send a message. All right, that's good. We have that right now. All right, so now let's just talk about this archive. So the way I've sort of thought about this archive is that it should basically just be the sort of other side of the coin from the inbox. The format doesn't really need to be any different because when you're in the archive, you still want to be able to read all of your old messages. You still want to be able to navigate through those messages. So there's a really sort of a quick way that we can deal this. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy everything right here. Sorry, I got that little master widget up top or master step widget here. So just going to copy everything we have on this screen. Click over to archive and paste that in here. And the simplest way to turn this into an archive is to sort of deselect everything, click on this interactive record, come over to our filter right here, and just update this to is not null. So now it's just going to turn that around and filter out to make sure that every time that a record has a value in the red field, we're going to see it. And so presumably all of our red messages should be in the archive. So now we have a functioning archive. So we don't on this page need a red button. This send a message button can just be a back button. So go to step, let's say go to step inbox. And the only other thing we really need to make that functional is then to add a way of navigating to the archive. So let's just add those buttons really quickly up at the top on this. So we'll click our button, throw this up in the corner, do a little bit of resizing, just call this archive. Good. And then we'll add our logic, go to archive. All right, so action, go to step, archive, save, and we want this to be on our send a message step as well so that we have some good navigation in this application. Boom, go to archive. All right, so now all that's left is to just test this application out and see if everything is working the way it should. All right, so let's go back into dev mode. I'm going to refresh this really quickly, just start the session over in case there's any logic that needs to be updated. So apologies as you sit here and watch my browser reload. How's it going? Hopefully you're having a great day. All right, enough small talk. Let's do this instant messenger. All right, so when we start, we have no messages. So what I'm going to do is start sending some messages to myself. All right, so hey, is this actually working? Yeah, I'll keep the typo. We don't need to put on airs here. We're not fancy. So I'll send it to myself. All right, send. All right, let's just send a couple. So just like hey, send, hi, send. Are you still sending messages? All right, this is getting to overkill. So I'll just finish sending these messages. All right, good. Click back. Right. So now we have all these messages right here. So we can now scroll through them. And you can imagine these came from a bunch of different coworkers of yours. Maybe your manager needed to get in contact with you. Maybe there's actually something important that you needed to know or something that relates to the job you're working on at the time. All of this is going to be right there. All right, so we can mark these as red at this point. Get rid of them. All right, that's red. And now let's check out the archive, see if we have any trouble there. All right, so none of our historical messages, nothing that we've done prior to this session in dev mode has actually stayed. One of the virtues of dev mode is it all just poof disappears into the ether when you're done. But as you can see, all the messages that we've done on this session have made their way into the archive. Okay, so I did find one gap that I would want to fix. So this is a back button now, so it's a navigationally, it works great. I didn't change the text on it. I'm sure you caught that before I did. So we can just change that really quickly. All right. But all in all, so that's our application. So really quickly, let me just like recap everything that we've done so you have like sort of an overview if you need to like take everything that we've done and synthesize it. Okay, so quick final overview of this application. What we've really done is create a single table that allows us to write messages and store them in that table and then read messages from that table. We've spent most of the time in the app builder, but really that table is everything. The table is making everything work. It's the sort of the glue or the skeleton or whatever connective metaphor you want to use, whatever makes you happiest at this moment in time. So we've put this interactive table right here that displays all of the current records in that Tulip table that have the recipient or have the current user as a recipient and have not currently been read. We've put a button up here at the top that allows us to mark as read and move our messages to the archive. And we've put an embedded table right here that only shows the messages field of that embedded table that allows us to read out all of the content that is in that field. In our messages, in our send a message step, what we've done is we've created two inputs for your message and for your recipient, stored the values put in those fields as variables, and then used those variables to push all of that data into a table along with the current date and time, the logged in user, and some other information just so that we've put in information, all the necessary fields in that table. All right, and from there, I think that's essentially it. If I've missed something, it was certainly covered in this tutorial so far. So I just want to say thank you for building along with me. Hopefully this is useful. Hopefully this is something that has allowed you to like learn a little bit more about Tulip, and maybe it's something you want to use, maybe not, but it's been a good overview nonetheless. And I appreciate you taking the time to watch. If you have any questions, do shout. All right, have a good day. Thanks.